The explanation was polite and perfectly wrong. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I'm your host, Enigma. Tell me where you're listening from. I truly appreciate each message. Let's uncover the truth. If you want to see a man insulted with good manners, come to our front stoop around 11 on a Tuesday. It was February, which in our line of work meant two things. The sidewalk outside looked like it had been scraped with a dull knife, and my employer had doubled down on his idea that the only sensible thing to do with winter was to deny it any meaning. The orchids upstairs were doing their best impression of a tropical republic, and the food in the kitchen was doing its best impression of a reason to forgive humanity. Nothing in the brownstone was supposed to acknowledge that New York had teeth. That morning had been proceeding in the approved fashion. Wolfe had eaten his breakfast with the gravity of a judge passing sentence, then climbed the stairs to the plant rooms with the solemnity of a priest going to the altar. I had handled the mail, the phone, and a brief altercation with a zipper that had decided it was entitled to the rest of the day off. I was at my desk in the office on the ground floor, making an honest effort to look useful, when the doorbell rang. Our bell has a particular voice. It doesn't ring so much as announce itself. There is someone at your door who believes you should care. I cared only because it was my job to filter the world before it reached Wolfe, who regarded most of humanity as an unfortunate byproduct of appetite. I opened the door and got a face full of cold air and a woman who had treated herself like a business appointment. She was in her late 30s, maybe 40, and wore a camel coat with a belt that could have held down a tent in high wind. Her gloves were black, her hat was simple, and her eyes were the kind that made you think of ledgers, neat columns, tidy sums, no mercy for rounding errors. She didn't smile, but she did something almost as disarming. She spoke as if she'd already been allowed in. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. That gave me a half-second pause. I hadn't seen her before, and I'm not the sort who forgets a face that looks like it could fire you. I kept my own smile in working order. "That's right, you've got me at a disadvantage." "I doubt it." She held out a card. "My name is Cora Vane." The card was thick, creamy, and expensive enough to have its own opinions. Cora Vane, Vane Strategies Incorporated. No title, no flourish. Just a phone number and an address in Midtown that probably had glass doors that sighed when you entered. "Strategy," I said. "You telling people what to do for money?" "I tell organizations what they already know in a way they can't ignore." I laughed once, quietly, and stepped aside. "That sounds like a public service. Come in before you freeze. You're early for a miracle, but we take walk-ins if the apocalypse is scheduled." She walked into the hall like she owned the deed but hadn't bothered to look it up. That's always a mistake in our house. The brownstone doesn't take well to presumptions. It's got more dignity than most bishops. Still, she didn't gawk, didn't crane her neck, didn't do the usual tourist routine with the hat rack. She just stood where I indicated and waited as if I were the one who'd asked for the meeting. "Who sent you?" I asked. "No one." That's almost never true. It is today. She took off one glove, and I noticed her hands. Strong, clean, and restless. Not fidgety, restless like a runner forced to stand in line. "All right," I said. "Let's start with the most important question. Are you here with trouble, money, or both?" "Neither," she said, and then, because she understood what the word sounded like, she added, "Not in the usual form." I let the silence sit on it for a beat, then gestured toward the office. "This way. I'll see if Mr. Wolfe is taking visitors, which he almost never is." "I know." Her eyes moved, quickly, efficiently, to the office door as if she'd already pictured what would be behind it. He will see me." That was when she made her first mistake. She said it too calmly. People who truly know Wolfe's habits don't talk like they can push them around. They talk like they're trying not to drown. Inside the office, everything was in its proper place. Wolfe's red leather chair facing the desk itself immaculate because I kept it that way, and the framed print on the wall that made it look like we'd been here longer than we had. Wolfe wasn't in his chair. He was still upstairs with the orchids. That was good. Wolfe doesn't like to be interrupted when he is communing with plants. He claims they have more refined conversation. I waved her to the yellow chair, client seating, and took my own position behind the desk. Mr. Wolfe is occupied, I told her. If you'll explain, I came because something has been explained to me, she said, politely. I waited. Her gaze held mine without blinking. A man I employ has given notice. He says he's leaving because of my methods. That was his word. Methods. As if I were manufacturing counterfeit currency. Maybe you are, I said. I've seen some of the prices in Midtown. It's not about the money, she said. He has been with me 7 years. He knows my methods better than anyone. He said he is leaving because he can't be party to what I am becoming. That is an explanation, polite, and it is. She hesitated, and that, finally, made her human. It is wrong. I leaned back. So you want Mr. Wolfe to convince him to stay? No, I want Mr. Wolfe to tell me why he's really leaving. The bell on that rang a little cleaner, and it wasn't a simple domestic grievance. It was a question with teeth. And you're coming to a private detective, I said, because he didn't just quit, she said. He performed the quit. He staged it. He left me a memorandum, not resignation, a memorandum, 3 pages, numbered, with headings. I couldn't help it. I grinned. That's the kind of thing you frame. He knew I would read it carefully, she said. He knew I would look for what was not said. That is what he does. Or did. Who is this memo-writing Hamlet? Gideon Rusk. The name didn't ping anything in my head immediately, and that was either because he wasn't famous, or because he was famous in circles that didn't pay my grocery bill. What does Mr. Rusk do for you? I asked. He runs my research division, and he handles information acquisition and verification. In plain English, I said, he finds out things people don't want found out and makes sure they're true. Yes, and now he's gone. Not yet, she said. His notice is for Friday. It was Tuesday. That gave her 3 days and change, which in the world of corporate backstabbing is enough time for someone to change the locks and burn the building down. Why come to us? I asked. Why not talk to him? I did. She held up her bare hand. On her ring finger there was a pale mark where a ring used to be. He said he would not discuss it further. He said my attempt to negotiate was predictable. That made me whistle softly. Sounds like he knows you well. He does, she said with a hint of something like resentment. That is the problem. I watched her for a moment. She had control, but it wasn't effortless. It was the kind of control you learn when you spend your life turning chaos into bullet points. She wasn't here because she was frightened of being alone. She was here because she hated being outmaneuvered. Let's say we take an interest, I said. What's the harm if he leaves? She answered too quickly. The harm is not in him leaving. The harm is in his reason. I nodded. That's better. She inhaled once, shallow. My firm advises certain clients on crisis planning, reputational threats, competitive vulnerabilities, sometimes personal matters. Blackmail, I said. No, she said, sharp as a snapped string. Not blackmail. We do not extort. We assess. We warn. We recommend. I spread my hands. Sure. Like a man who sells umbrellas recommends rain. Her eyes narrowed. We do not harm people. Then why does your head of research think you are becoming something he can't stand? I asked. That is exactly what I want Mr. Wolfe to answer. I heard a footstep on the stairs, the solid, measured tread that sounded like it belonged to a person who never hurried because the world could wait. Another footstep. And another. Then the door to the office opened without ceremony. because nobody in this house believed in knocking except out of politeness, and Wolfe regarded politeness as a currency to be spent carefully. He entered like a large fact. Nero Wolfe was in his usual black suit, which fit him like an argument, and his face held its usual expression of mild disapproval, as though someone somewhere had just invented a new kind of foolishness, and he could sense it. He stopped, took in the room, and looked at Cora Vane as if she were a specimen. "Archie," he said, "you have admitted a stranger." "She knew my name," I said. "That's practically a reference." His eyes shifted to her card on my desk. He did not pick it up. Wolfe never touches anything if he can make someone else do it. "Madam," he said, "you're occupying my chair's line of sight." She stood. Not quickly. Respectfully, but without the kind of deference that begs. "Mr. Wolfe," he inclined his head a fraction, "state your business." She glanced at me, as if deciding whether I was part of the furniture or part of the mechanism, then faced him. "I've been given an explanation," she said. "It sounded polite. I believe it is a weapon." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted a millimeter. That was, in Wolfe language, a small concession to interest. "And you have chosen words with care," he said. "I live by them," she replied. "An unfortunate habit." He moved to his chair, sat, and settled as if the chair were an extension of his person. "Proceed." She did. She delivered the facts with a trained economy. The memorandum, the resignation effective Friday, the refusal to discuss. The phrase, "what I am becoming," which I saw tighten her mouth when she repeated it. Wolfe listened without moving, which was his way. When she finished, he sat in silence long enough that I could hear the faint tick of the clock and, somewhere in the kitchen, the promise of lunch being prepared. Then Wolfe spoke. "Why?" he asked. "Do you imagine I would concern myself with the employment decisions of your subordinate?" Cora Vane didn't flinch. "Because he has information." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Of what nature?" "Of the kind that makes him dangerous," she said. "And makes me vulnerable." Wolfe leaned back. He did not look pleased, but he did look awake, which in this house was something. "What is it you fear, madam?" he asked. "That he will reveal your secrets?" "No," she said after a breath. "That he will reveal a lie that has been constructed around me. One I did not build." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Mine did too. That sentence had a hinge. "A lie," Wolfe repeated. "By whom?" "That," she said, "is what I am paying to learn." Wolfe's lips compressed, and I recognized the moment when his mind decided to be interested, while his pride decided to pretend otherwise. He hated being dragged into other people's messes. He loved discovering the shape of a deception. "How much?" he asked abruptly. She named a figure without hesitation. I didn't blink, because I'd been trained, but internally I did a small somersault. It was enough money to make even Wolfe consider postponing a lecture about the decline of civilization. Wolfe looked at me. "Archie," he said, "if you have not already compromised the brownstone with inappropriate promises, inform Mrs. Vane that I will consider her proposal." "I haven't promised anything," I said. "I'm a model of restraint." Wolfe ignored that. He looked back at her. "You will leave me with a summary of your memorandum, and you will provide the name and address of Mr. Gideon Rusk. You will then depart. I will not be importuned. I will communicate my decision within the hour." She held his gaze, then nodded. "Thank you." Wolfe's expression remained unchanged. "Do not thank me. Gratitude is premature." She turned toward the desk, and I handed her a pad and pen, and she wrote with the steady hand of someone who never scribbles. While she did, Wolfe watched her like a man listening to a language he could already speak. When she finished and stood again, Wolfe said, almost casually, "One more thing, madam." "Yes." "Your explanation that sounded polite," Wolfe said. "Bring it with you." "I did," she replied. and tapped her coat pocket. I wouldn't have come without it. For the first time, Wolfe's eyes warmed with something like approval, thin as a razor edge. "Very well," he said. "Go." I walked her to the door. On the stoop, the cold hit us again, and she paused, just long enough for me to see the strain under her composure. "You think he'll take it?" she asked. "I think," I said, "that if your problem is as tidy and poisonous as it sounds, he'll have trouble resisting. But don't try to steer him." "I wouldn't dare," she said, and for a moment her mouth did something that might have become a smile in a less disciplined woman. "He seems difficult." "He's a peach," I said, "a large one, with opinions." She left without looking back, moving down the steps with the same deliberate control she'd brought with her. I shut the door and leaned against it for a second, letting the brownstones quiet, close around me like a familiar coat. Then I went back to the office, where Wolfe sat like a monument that had decided to think. "Well?" I asked him. Wolfe's eyes were half-lidded. "Archie," he said, "there is an odor." "From where I'm sitting," I said, "the only odor is coffee, and it's a friendly one." "Not that," he said. "The odor of manipulation. Mrs. Vane is being maneuvered. If her man Rusk is indeed dangerous, the danger is not in what he knows, it is in what someone wishes him to do with it." "And she thinks she's the spider," I said, "but she's on the web." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "You are occasionally tolerable." "Thanks," I said. "I'll put it on a pillow." He held out his hand without looking. I gave him the summary she'd written. He read it once, then again, slowly, and I could almost hear the gears in his head catching and turning. At last, he set the paper down. "We will take the case," he said. "You didn't even pretend to think about it for an hour," I pointed out. "I said I would communicate my decision," he replied. "I did not say I would delay it." I grinned. "What's the hook?" Wolfe's eyes lifted to mine. There was a glint there that meant he'd found something in the polite explanation that interested him. Something small, maybe, but sharp. "The memorandum," he said, "is not merely a resignation. It is a message." "A message to her?" "Possibly," Wolfe said, "but more likely, to someone else." He paused, then delivered the part that made the brownstone feel, for the first time that day, like it had been nudged off its axis. "And," he added, "its author has committed a discourtesy." "A discourtesy," I repeated. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the door as if he could see through walls and into the street. "He has assumed," Wolfe said, "that he can dictate the terms upon which I may be approached." I let that sink in. In this house, that was practically a felony. "All right," I said, rolling my shoulders. "You want me to go see Gideon Rusk?" "Of course," Wolfe said. "I will remain here." "Shocking," I murmured. Wolfe ignored me again, which was a sign he was properly engaged. "Before you go," he said, "bring me the memorandum itself. Mrs. Vane has it. You will retrieve it today." "Today?" I echoed. Wolfe's voice was mild, but there was steel under it. "Yes, Archie. Today. Because a polite explanation that is a weapon is rarely left lying about without someone intending to use it. And that, right there, was how the sanctity of our brownstone got its first crack. Not with a body on the rug, not with a gunshot in the night, but with 3 pages of numbered headings in a woman's coat pocket, waiting to be read the wrong way by the right person. Wolfe's "today" had the same quality as a bank's "immediately." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a policy. I stood there for a second, letting my brain do the quick inventory. Coat, hat, notebook, patience, and then I went to the hall closet. Behind me, Wolfe's chair made a tiny sound as he resettled, which was his way of pretending he hadn't just thrown a stone through our quiet morning. "You're sending me to retrieve a document from a woman who just left," I said, pulling on my overcoat. "Do you want me to chase her down the sidewalk and tackle her?" No, Wolfe said. You will telephone her. If she hesitates, you will remind her of her own stated interest in the truth. Sure, I said. Truth always loosens people's grip on paperwork. Wolfe made a small dismissive noise. If she refuses, you will return and I will decline the case. Mrs. Vane is not, I think, foolish enough to force that choice. That was Wolfe. He didn't threaten. He offered you a cliff and let you decide whether to step off. I went to my desk and picked up the phone and dialed the number on her card. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for the phone to justify her departure. Goodwin. Mrs. Vane, Mr. Wolfe wants the memorandum, the entire thing. Today. A pause, just long enough for me to picture her in some sleek car with heated seats, gloved hands on the wheel, deciding whether to be offended or practical. I told him I brought it, she said. You did, I agreed. Now he wants it in his hands, not in your coat pocket. That's irregular. So are we, I said. You came here because you believed it was a weapon. Weapons don't stay with the person who might be shot. Another pause. I could hear traffic in the background. She was moving. Where are you? I asked. On my way back to my office. Turn around. I'm not in the habit of being told what to do, I finished. I know. Pretend you're paying for it. Her breath sharpened. Then she said, I can be at your door in 20 minutes. Make it 15, I said, and hung up before she could add a clause. When I turned, Wolfe was watching me with the calm of a cat that had just batted something off the table on purpose. She will return, he said. I hope so, I told him, because if she doesn't, I'll have to explain to you why you don't get to read the fun memo, and that's not a job I want. Wolfe's eyes drifted away, toward the corner of the room where the air seemed a degree warmer, the brownstone's private climate of comfort. In the interim, he said, I will require time. You always do. I require solitude, Wolfe corrected. Do not chatter. I wouldn't dream of it. I shut my mouth and did the useful kind of waiting. I sharpened a pencil, aligned a stack of paper, and listened. The brownstone has its own soundtrack. Fritz in the kitchen with muted, efficient movements, the faint tick of the clock, the occasional creak of pipes that had been here longer than either of us. In most houses, those sounds are background. In ours, they're a comfort. They mean nothing is wrong. But when something is about to go wrong, you feel it by contrast, like a draft in a room you thought was sealed. 15 minutes later, 18, but I wasn't going to scold her for New York traffic. Cora Vane was back on our stoop. I let her in and didn't bother with pleasantries. You brought it? She took the memorandum from her coat pocket and handed it to me without drama. 3 pages, crisp, numbered, with headings exactly as she'd described. It looked like it had been written by someone who believed punctuation was a moral act. You're treating it like a bomb, she said, watching my hands. It's paper, I said. Bombs are usually metal, but paper can blow up lives just fine. In the office, Wolfe held out his hand without standing. I passed him the memorandum. He did not thank her. He didn't even acknowledge her presence beyond the bare courtesy of allowing her to occupy the yellow chair again. He began to read. Wolfe reads like he eats. Slowly, thoroughly, with the stubborn insistence that nothing valuable should be rushed. The first page held him for longer than I would have expected for a resignation. That meant it wasn't a resignation, no matter what the heading said. But I watched his face, the only part of him that ever gave anything away, and tried to catch the tiny signals, the tightening at the mouth, the slight lift of the brows, the narrowing of the eyes when something didn't fit. Cora Vane sat perfectly still. It was a practiced stillness, like a violinist holding position between notes. I could see she wanted to talk and was forcing herself not to. That, in our office, was a form of respect. Wolfe finished the first page, turned it with 2 fingers, and continued. When he reached the second page, his eyes paused on a line. Not long, not obvious, but enough for me to know he'd found the hook he hadn't explained. He finished the third page. Then he set the memorandum down on the desk as if it had acquired weight. For a moment, he said nothing. Silence in Wolfe's office has rules. It isn't awkward. Yes, it's a tool. He used it now, not to make her uncomfortable, but to give his brain the space it liked. Finally, he spoke, looking at her as though she were a witness in a trial he'd just decided to hold. "Mrs. Vane," he said, "you have employed Mr. Gideon Rusk to collect and verify information." "Yes." "And you have permitted him," Wolfe said, "to believe that your firm's guiding principle is prudence." Her chin lifted a fraction. "It is." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Then either you are deceiving him, or he is deceiving you." Her voice stayed controlled. "That is why I'm here." Wolfe tapped the memorandum once with a fingertip. "This document is composed with deliberation. It contains—" He paused, as if selecting the least wasteful word, exaggerations of propriety. "It is meant to appear candid while concealing its true purpose." Cora Vane's eyes sharpened. "Which is?" Wolfe did not answer immediately. He turned his gaze to me instead. "Archie," he said, "what do you observe about Mrs. Vane's account of this resignation?" "That it's dramatic without being dramatic," I said. "Like a man slamming a door but putting a towel down first so it doesn't scratch the paint." Wolfe nodded slightly. "Precisely. Mr. Rusk is not merely leaving. He's performing for an audience." Cora Vane leaned forward for the first time. "What audience?" Wolfe looked at her again. "Who else has access to this memorandum?" "No one," she said. It was addressed to me. "And yet," Wolfe said, "it is written as if it anticipates being read by others." Her lips parted, then closed. "It has headings." "It has signals," Wolfe said, that in his tone made the word a reprimand. "One does not number grievances unless one expects them to be cited." I felt my own curiosity kick up. "So you're saying Rusk is quitting in a way that can be quoted?" "Exactly," Wolfe said. "And he has inserted into it a phrase, your phrase, madam, which is intended to provoke." Cora Vane's hands tightened together in her lap. "What I am becoming." Wolfe's eyes were cool. "Yes, it is designed to create in you a particular state. Urgency." She exhaled slowly. "Well, it worked." "It was meant to," Wolfe said. "Now, tell me of your clientele. Not by names, if you insist upon discretion, by categories." She hesitated. Wolfe waited, unblinking. "Public companies," she said. "Private equity, political organizations, high-net-worth individuals." Wolfe's eyes narrowed a shade. "Political." She did not rise to the bait. "Strategic communications, Mr. Wolfe." "Language," Wolfe said softly, "is a narcotic used to dull conscience." That hit her, but she absorbed it. "We don't fabricate," she said. "We advise." Wolfe's hand lifted, palm outward, enough to stop a train if trains had manners. "Your protest is irrelevant. I'm not interested in your self-assessment. I'm interested in the mechanism by which you are being attacked." "Attacked," she repeated. "Yes," Wolfe said. "This resignation is an assault, executed with courtesy. Its author intends for you to respond predictably, to blunder, to panic, to expose something." Her voice was tight now, the first crack in the polished surface. "Expose what?" Wolfe's eyes moved to me. "Archie will go to see Mr. Gideon Rusk." I blinked. "We're not warming up with coffee and a pastry first." Wolfe ignored me, as usual. "He will determine whether Mr. Rusk's resignation is sincere, coerced, or staged for a third party." Cora Vane said, "He will not speak to me." "He may speak to Archie," Wolfe said, "because Archie is not you." I grinned at that. Sometimes that's my best quality. Wolfe continued, "You, madam, will provide Archie with Mr. Rusk's address and any relevant schedule. You will also tell me, truthfully, whether there is any recent incident at your firm that could have alarmed him." She stared at Wolfe, then at the memorandum, as if seeing its neat headings with new suspicion. "There was an incident," she said at last. Wolfe's eyes stayed steady. "Describe it." She swallowed. "2 weeks ago, a client demanded a file, raw research. Mr. Rusk refused. And he said it was incomplete and therefore dangerous. I overruled him." "What client?" Wolfe asked. "I can't give you the name." "You can," Wolfe said, "or you can leave." That landed. She didn't like being cornered in her own habitat. And yet here she was, cornered in ours. After a beat, she said, "The client is named Halden Trexler." That name did ping something. Not a face, but a flavor. Money with a taste for influence. Wolfe's gaze didn't shift. And what did Mr. Trexler want that Mr. Rusk refused to provide? She opened her mouth, closed it, then said the words as if they were dirty. "A profile." "A profile of whom?" Wolfe asked. Her eyes went to the window for a split second, toward the street, as if the answer might be standing out there listening. "Of me," she said. The room changed, not in any theatrical way, no thunder, and no music cue, but in the way air changes when you realize a door you thought was locked has been open all along. Wolfe's expression remained calm, but his voice sharpened. "A client," he said, "demanded a profile on you, your own firm's owner, and you permitted it." "I didn't permit it," she snapped, then caught herself. "I managed it. I thought it was a test, a leverage play. Trexler likes demonstrations." "And Mr. Rusk," Wolfe said, "did not." "No." "And after you overruled him," Wolfe said, "he composed this memorandum." She nodded once, stiffly. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. The cat had found the string. "Archie," he said, "you will go at once, before Mr. Rusk has the opportunity to receive further instructions." I reached for my hat. "Address?" Cora Vane gave it to me, and I wrote it down. Then she added quietly, "He lives alone." "Most people do," I said. "It's a popular hobby." Wolfe's eyes flicked toward her. "Mrs. Vane will remain available. She will not leave the city. She will not warn Mr. Trexler. She will not attempt to contact Mr. Rusk again." Cora Vane's chin lifted. "You're giving orders." Wolfe's voice was mild. "No, madam. I'm describing conditions." I headed for the door, but as I reached it, Wolfe spoke once more, and his tone made me stop. "And Archie," he said, "do not permit Mr. Rusk to control the conversation." I glanced back. "Meaning?" Wolfe's eyes were steady. "Meaning he has already attempted to dictate the terms by which he may be questioned. That discourtesy cannot be allowed to stand." I smiled thinly. "You want me to be rude?" "I want you," Wolfe said, "to be effective." I left the brownstone with that in my pocket, and along with the address, the cold air, and the uneasy feeling that we weren't chasing a man who had quit. We were chasing a message that had been sent ahead of him. The address Cora Vane had given me led to a narrow building on the east side that looked like it had been designed by a committee that hated decisions. Brick, 5 stories, a lobby that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and resignation. The kind of place where people lived because it was quiet, not because it inspired them. I buzzed Gideon Rusk's apartment. Nothing. I buzzed again, longer this time, and leaned back to scan the street through the smeared glass of the entryway. No movement I could see, but that didn't mean much. Men who trade in information learn early how to become invisible without leaving. I buzzed a third time. Still nothing. That was interesting, but not conclusive. People miss buzzers. People shower. People pretend not to be home. The trick is figuring out which category you're dealing with. I stepped back outside, took in the building properly, and checked the mailboxes just inside the door. Rusk, G, 3rd floor. Left. No tape over the slot, no overflowing mail. Someone was emptying it. Recently. I went back in, climbed the stairs, and stopped outside his door. It was plain, brown, with a brass number that had been polished at some point in its life and then neglected with intent. I knocked. Firm, not aggressive. "Mr. Rusk," I said. "Archie Goodwin." Silence. I knocked again. "I'm here about your memorandum." That did it. There was movement inside. Soft, controlled. The kind that didn't want to advertise itself. A moment later, the door opened about 4 inches, held by a chain. Gideon Rusk's face filled the gap. He was thinner than I'd imagined, late 40s maybe, with dark hair going grey at the temples and eyes that were already measuring me for weaknesses. He wore a sweater that looked comfortable enough to sleep in and expensive enough not to be accidental. "Yes?" he said. "Sir, I work for Nero Wolfe," I said. "You know the name." His eyes flicked, just once, to my shoes, then back to my face. "I know it." "Good," I said. "Then we can skip the part where you tell me you have nothing to say." He hesitated. That was all I needed. The chain came off. The door opened wider. "Come in," he said. The apartment was tidy in a way that suggested control rather than cleanliness. Books arranged by size and subject. Desk cleared except for a lamp, a legal pad, and a pen aligned with surgical precision. No photographs, so no personal clutter. A place designed to leave no trace of emotion. "You're efficient," I said, glancing around. He shut the door and locked it. "Efficiency reduces exposure." "Sure," I said. "So does honesty, but it's not as popular." He didn't rise to that. He gestured toward a chair. I sat, uninvited but expected. "You're here because of Cora Vane," he said. "I'm here because of you," I said. "She's the occasion." His mouth tightened slightly. "I told her everything she needs to know." "That's funny," I said. "Mr. Wolfe thinks you told her exactly what you wanted her to know." Rusk's eyes sharpened. "Wolfe is a man who prides himself on suspicion. And you're a man who writes resignations like position papers," I said. "You expected a reader." He didn't answer right away. He went to the desk, picked up the pen, and set it down again without writing anything. A tell, small but there. "You overruled a directive," I said, keeping my voice casual. "About a profile." That got him. Not a flinch. He was too good for that, but a subtle shift in posture, as if he'd been bracing for something and it had arrived on schedule. "She told you," he said. "She told Wolfe," I corrected. "Wolfe told me to listen." Rusk smiled faintly. It wasn't friendly. "Then you already know why I'm leaving." "I know why you said you're leaving," I said. "I don't know why you staged it." He turned fully toward me now. "You assume a great deal." "I get paid for it." He studied me. "Does Wolfe know who Halden Trexler really is?" "Wolfe knows what kind of man demands a profile on the person paying him," I said. "That's enough to start with." Rusk let out a quiet breath through his nose. "Trexler doesn't collect information. He collects leverage." "So I hear," I said. "You refuse to give him some." "I refuse to give him her," Rusk said sharply. "There's a difference." "That's gallant," I said. "Or strategic. Hard to tell." "Neither," he said. "It was necessary." "Because?" He hesitated again. This time it was longer, heavier. The silence thickened. "Because Trexler didn't want the profile to use against Cora Vane," Rusk said finally. "He wanted it to use through her." I leaned back slightly. "Explain that without the poetry." Rusk's jaw tightened. "Trexler has been assembling a consortium. Political money, corporate money. Influence disguised as advice. Vain strategies is useful to him because it looks clean, credible. If he could compromise her, even subtly, he could guide her recommendations, shape outcomes. And you caught on, I said. I caught on early, he said, which is why I built redundancies. That word rang like a bell. Redundancies, I repeated. Plural. He didn't deny it. Information doesn't belong in one place. That's amateur hour. Then why quit? I asked. Why not blow the whistle, torch the whole thing? Rusk smiled again, thinner. Because you don't blow whistles on men like Trexler. You step aside and make them nervous. And the memorandum, I said. The numbered headings. The phrase about what she's becoming. A signal, he said, to Trexler and to anyone else watching. So you wanted him to know you were out, I said. But not why. Exactly. I nodded slowly. There's a problem. There usually is, Rusk said. You assumed Cora Vane would panic, I said. You assumed she'd scramble, as you assumed she wouldn't bring in Nero Wolfe. His eyes flickered. Just once. That was an oversight, he admitted. Overlooks get people hurt, I said lightly. He stiffened. Are you threatening me? No, I said. I'm informing you. I stood, walked to the window and looked down at the street. A black sedan idled at the curb across the way. Nothing remarkable about it, except that it hadn't moved since I arrived. You expecting company? I asked. Rusk moved to the window beside me. His eyes narrowed. No, he said. The sedan's engine cut. The driver stayed inside. That's not a pizza delivery, I said. Rusk swore under his breath. He's faster than I thought. Trexler, I asked. Or someone he hired, Rusk said. Same thing. I turned back to him. You've got redundancies. Where? He hesitated. Gideon, I said, but using his first name deliberately. If men in black sedans are involved, politeness is off the menu. His eyes met mine. The calculation there was fast and sharp. I left copies, he said. With a lawyer, with a journalist. Dead man instructions. Smart, I said, but not foolproof. No, he said quietly, which is why I needed Wolfe. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't call him. I called her, Rusk said, by resigning. That fit. Too well. You set her up to seek Wolfe, I said. Yes. And now? I asked. Now, he said. Trexler knows I've moved. He doesn't know how far. The sedan's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, nondescript, wearing a coat that didn't wrinkle easily. I glanced at Rusk. You planning to leave? He shook his head. That would look like guilt. Guilt's overrated, I said. Staying alive isn't. The man crossed the street. I took out my notebook. Not to write, but because it gave my hands something to do besides tense. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to sit tight. You're going to answer the door. You're going to be boring. And you? Rusk asked. I'm going to call my employer, I said, and tell him the polite explanation just got teeth. The knock came. Firm, professional. Rusk looked at me. Open it, I said. Wolfe hates being kept waiting. Rusk drew a breath, squared his shoulders, and went to the door. As it opened, I was already dialing, because I had a feeling the quiet of the brownstone was about to be disturbed in a way Wolfe would find deeply educational, and not at all amusing. Rusk opened the door the rest of the way, and the man on the threshold didn't step in, right off. Then he did the opposite. He smiled politely and waited, as if asking permission from the wallpaper. He was in his 40s, clean-shaven with hair that looked like it had been cut weekly to prevent it from developing personality. His coat was dark, his shoes were sensible, and his eyes had that practiced blandness you see in men who spend their lives making other people answer questions. Mr. Rusk? He said. Yes, Rusk replied. His voice stayed level. but I saw his hand tighten on the edge of the door. The man produced a leather wallet and flipped it open briefly. The motion was too quick for me to read anything but the intent. Authority, official enough to discourage curiosity. "Special Agent Vargo," he said. "May I come in?" Rusk hesitated a half-beat, just enough to make it clear he understood that "may" was decorative. "Can I have company?" Rusk said. Vargo's eyes slid past him and landed on me. "And you are?" Vargo asked. I kept my phone at my ear, thumb poised over the end button. "Archie Goodwin." The name didn't register. That was either genuine or well-trained. "And your business here?" "Conversation," I said. "The endangered species." Vargo's smile remained. "Mr. Rusk, this won't take long." Rusk's chin lifted. "I prefer to know what I'm consenting to." "You're not consenting," I said pleasantly. "You're complying." Rusk shot me a look. Annoyance, gratitude, maybe both, then stepped aside. Vargo entered and took in the apartment in one sweep, eyes touching everything without landing long enough to count as staring. He clocked the desk, the books, the bare walls, and the window. He was already building a picture. I ended the call before it connected. And calling Wolfe while a federal agent was in the room felt like tossing a match into a dry closet. I slid the phone into my pocket and leaned back in my chair, making myself look like furniture with opinions. Vargo didn't sit. He stood where he could see both of us and the door, and he kept his hands visible as if that was a kindness. "Mr. Rusk," he said, "I'm going to ask you a few questions about your employment at Vane Strategies." Rusk's expression stayed neutral. "On what basis?" "On the basis," Vargo said, "that your firm has been contracted by parties of interest in an ongoing investigation." That was the kind of sentence designed to sound like it had weight while revealing nothing that could be challenged. Rusk's eyes narrowed slightly. "Parties of interest?" "Yes." "Which parties?" Rusk asked. Vargo's smile hardened. "Sir, that is not information I'm at liberty to share." I couldn't resist. "Then it's not information he's at liberty to confirm." Vargo looked at me again. This time his eyes were sharper. "Mr. Goodwin, is it?" "On my best days." "Do you represent Mr. Rusk?" "No," I said. "If I did, he'd be charging me." Vargo ignored that. "Then I'm going to ask you to refrain from interrupting." "I'll try," I said, "but it's a compulsion." Rusk said quietly, "What exactly is your interest in me, Agent Vargo?" Vargo's tone remained mild. "We understand that you have access to sensitive materials, files, research, profiles." Rusk's jaw tightened. "Your understanding is broad." "Broad is sometimes useful," Vargo said. "We'd like to ensure that certain materials are not removed, copied, or disseminated improperly." Rusk's eyes flicked to me, then back. That sounds like a warning." "It's an advisement," Vargo said. "Same suit, different tie," I muttered. Vargo's head turned a fraction. "Mr. Goodwin," I held up a hand. "Sorry, I'll be quiet as a church mouse. Continue advising." Vargo returned his attention to Rusk. "Are you currently in possession of proprietary materials belonging to Vane Strategies?" Rusk paused. "I am in possession of my own knowledge." "That's poetic," Vargo said, but not responsive. Rusk's voice cooled. "Then ask a better question." That did something subtle to Vargo's demeanor. The polite mask stayed in place, but the temperature dropped a degree. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way in rooms like this. "I'll be direct," Vargo said. "Have you been approached by anyone, any person or organization, seeking to acquire internal documents from your firm?" Rusk didn't answer immediately. I watched Vargo closely. He was too smooth to be a street guy, too bland to be an ego guy. He had the air of someone sent, not someone improvising. Rusk finally said, "I don't discuss private business with strangers." Vargo's smile thinned. "We're not strangers, Mr. Rusk. We're the government." "That's not comforting," I said before I could stop myself. Vargo's eyes cut to me. "Mr. Goodwin, last warning." I gave him a grin. "Noted," Rusk said. "Do you have a warrant?" "No," Vargo said, as if the word was quaint. "Not at this time." "Then you're in my home," Rusk said. "By my courtesy. Your questions are optional." Vargo's gaze held his. "Courtesy has limits. So do rights," Rusk said. Vargo nodded slowly, as if appreciating the lesson. Then he did something that surprised me. He shifted focus. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "what is your interest in Mr. Rusk?" I blinked. "I'm a curious fellow." "Are you here on behalf of Nero Wolfe?" Vargo asked. That landed like a pebble in a still pond. Small, but the ripples went everywhere. Rusk's eyes snapped to mine. He hadn't expected Wolfe's name to be in this room from that direction. I kept my face casual. "You've heard of him?" "I've heard of him," Vargo said. "He has a habit of inserting himself into matters where he doesn't belong." "People say that about me too," I said. Vargo didn't smile. If Wolfe is involved, then this situation has escalated beyond a routine inquiry. Rusk's voice tightened. "So you know Wolfe, and that means you know why I'm leaving." Vargo's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Why are you leaving, Mr. Rusk?" Rusk hesitated. Just a breath. In that breath I saw the conflict. Say nothing and look guilty. Say something and give away leverage. He chose a third option. "Ask Mrs. Vane." Vargo nodded once, as if that confirmed something he'd already suspected. He reached into his coat and produced a card, plain white with black print. "If you remember anything you'd like to share," Vargo said, "call me." Rusk didn't take it. Vargo set it on the edge of the desk anyway, precisely aligned with the legal pad, like he was leaving a marker. Then he turned slightly, enough to indicate he was leaving, but not enough to give up control of the room. "One more thing," Vargo said. "Mr. Rusk, as you should be careful." Rusk's eyes were cold. "Of what?" Vargo's smile returned, small and unpleasant. "Of accidents." He left. The door clicked shut behind him and the apartment seemed to exhale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Rusk crossed to the desk, picked up the card, and held it between two fingers as if it might stain him. "That," he said quietly, "was not supposed to happen." I stood and went to the window. The sedan was pulling away. No hurry, no drama, just the confidence of someone who had delivered a message and knew it would be received. "Looks like your audience found you," I said. Rusk's voice was tight. "That man isn't here about my resignation. He's here about what I didn't hand over." "Which means you were right to refuse," I said, "and wrong to think you had time." Rusk turned to me. "You need to tell Wolfe." "I was about to," I said, pulling out my phone. "But now I'm going to be careful how." Rusk's gaze sharpened. "He knows who Vargo is." "I'm not sure Vargo is who he says he is," I replied. Rusk froze. "You think he's not federal?" "I think real federal agents don't usually hint about accidents unless they want lawsuits," I said. "And they don't usually know Wolfe's name as a trigger." Rusk's lips compressed. "Trexler has friends." "Or employees," I said. "Either way, it's trouble." I dialed Wolfe's number and waited. When Fritz answered, I said, "Fritz, it's me. Put Mr. Wolfe on. Tell him it's urgent and involves an uninvited guest." A pause. Then Wolfe's voice came on, calm as ever. "Archie." "Wolfe," I said, keeping my tone level. "We've got company at Rusk's place. A man calling himself Special Agent Vargo. No warrant. Asked about files, profiles, and whether you're involved. Left a card and a warning about accidents." There was a beat of silence. I could picture Wolfe in his chair, eyes half-lidded, absorbing it like a new flavor. Then he said, "Describe him." I did. The haircut, the shoes, the quick badge flash, the way he'd left the card like a marker. When I finished, Wolfe's voice was cool. "He's not an agent of any legitimate service." "Glad you agree," I said. "What now?" Wolfe spoke with clipped precision. "You will return at once, with Mr. Rusk." Rusk heard that, and his eyes widened. "He'll come?" I asked. "He must," Wolfe said. "If he remains there, he will be isolated. I will not permit isolation. Bring him to the brownstone." I looked at Rusk. You heard the man. Rusk's jaw worked. "Bringing me to Wolfe puts him in the line." Wolfe's voice cut through the phone as if he could hear Rusk's thought. "Mr. Rusk will be safer here than anywhere else in Manhattan." I couldn't help it. That's either reassuring or insane. "It is accurate," Wolfe said. "Archie, do not dally. If Vargo returns, you will not attempt heroics. You will leave immediately. Understood?" "Understood," I said. Wolfe continued. "Also, telephone Mrs. Vane. Tell her to come to the brownstone at 4 o'clock. 4, I repeated. "That's soon." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The brownstone has been disturbed. I intend to discover by whom and why before dinner." The line went dead. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked at Rusk. "Pack a toothbrush," I said. "You're moving into the safest, to most temperamental house on West 35th Street." Rusk stared at the door, then at the card on his desk, then at me. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "If Trexler is pushing this hard, it means he's close. And if he's close, then Wolfe is already thinking 3 moves ahead," I finished. "That's his hobby." Rusk let out a slow breath, like a man stepping onto ice he didn't trust. "All right," he said, "but I'm not coming empty-handed." He went to a bookshelf, slid a finger along the spines, and pulled out a thin volume. He opened the cover and extracted a folded sheet of paper from inside, precisely hidden, precisely placed. He held it up. "This," he said, "is what started the polite explanation." I took it from him and glanced at the top line. It was a heading, typed cleanly, like a file label. "Narcora Vane, Character and Vulnerability. Profile, Draft." And beneath it, in smaller print, was a name that made my stomach tighten. Prepared for Holden Trexler. Rusk met my eyes. "Now you see." "Oh," I said softly. "Yeah, now I see." And for the first time since I'd left the brownstone, I felt the cold in my bones. Not from February, but from the realization that someone had tried to turn a woman into a tool, and a tool into a weapon, and that Wolfe was about to invite them all into his office and tell them, calmly, why it wouldn't work. Rusk didn't pack a toothbrush. He packed like a man who didn't believe in leaving evidence behind. He moved through the apartment with quick, economical motions. Wallet, keys, a slim overnight bag that looked like it had been purchased for exactly this purpose. No sentimental pauses. No last look around. But the only thing he handled with care was the folded sheet he'd pulled from the book. He put it in an inner pocket as if it were a passport. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded once. "If we leave by the front, we're visible." "If we leave by the window," I said, "we're committed. I prefer visible." We went down the stairs, listening as we did. No footsteps behind us. No elevator ping. The lobby was empty. Outside, the cold slapped us hard enough to feel like it had an opinion, and I did a fast sweep of the street. No black sedan now. Just a delivery truck, a woman walking a dog that looked offended by its leash, and a taxi idling with its driver staring at his phone like it held the fate of the world. Normal, which after Vargo made it feel staged. "Walk," I said, not because it was far, but because a moving target is harder to predict. So we headed towards 2nd Avenue with the practiced casualness of 2 men who didn't want to look like they were escaping anything. Rusk kept his eyes forward. If Trexler's people are in play, he'll know I'm gone within an hour. Then we'll make sure, I said, that within that hour, Wolfe knows more about Trexler than Trexler thinks possible. Rusk glanced at me. You sound confident. I've watched Wolfe make confident men sweat, I said. It's entertainment. We got a cab at the corner. I gave the driver Wolfe's address, and the cab lurched into traffic with the kind of aggression that passes for courtesy in New York. Rusk sat rigidly, hands clasped, eyes on the rearview mirror. I watched him and, in the mirror, watched the street behind us. Tell me about the draft, I said quietly. The profile. It wasn't supposed to exist, Rusk said. Not in that form, but it did. It was requested, he said. By Trexler, through an intermediary. Who? I said. Rusk's mouth tightened. That's one of the names Wolfe will want. Then start paying, I said, because you're in his house now and he charges in truth. Rusk hesitated. Then, as if the cab's motion had loosened something, he said, Maris Dane. I filed it away. Inside Vane Strategies? External, he said. She represents Trexler's family office. She's the sort who calls it coordination. And she asked for a profile on Cora Vane, I said. She didn't ask, Rusk corrected. She implied that cooperation would be appreciated. Nice, I said. And your boss let it happen. She told herself it was a test, Rusk said, voice tight. As she believes every threat is negotiable. And you believe some aren't, I said. I believe Trexler doesn't negotiate, Rusk said. He consumes. The cab turned onto 35th Street. Ahead, the brownstone sat the way it always does. Solid, self-contained, quietly judging the city around it. It's not a grand house, not from the outside. It just has a certainty about it, like it's never apologized for being what it is. We paid the driver and climbed the stoop. I rang our own bell out of habit because Fritz likes ceremony. The door opened promptly. Fritz's face registered Rusk, then me. His expression didn't change much. Fritz is not a man who wastes emotion, but his eyes sharpened with the only question he ever asks. Is this going to ruin dinner? Mr. Goodwin, he said. Mr. As Wolfe is expecting you. Tell him I brought him a memo writer, I said, and guided Rusk inside. Rusk paused in the hall, taking in the interior with quick, assessing eyes. Most outsiders do. The brownstone has a way of reminding you, within 5 seconds, that you are not in charge here. Rusk's gaze lingered on the stairs leading up to the plant rooms. He really never leaves? He asked. He leaves, I said. In the same way mountains leave, occasionally there's erosion. I brought him into the office. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, hands on the armrests, eyes calm. Cora Vane was not there yet. It was still early. Saul Panzer wasn't there either, which meant Wolfe hadn't played that card yet, or he was waiting to make it count. Wolfe looked at Rusk as if Rusk were a document that had walked in under its own power. Mr. Rusk, Wolfe said. Sit. Rusk sat in the yellow chair, client chair, without being invited to choose otherwise. That told me something about his mental state. A man who usually controls rooms will accept less when he's calculating. You have been visited, Wolfe said, by a man who claimed to be an agent. Yes, Rusk said. And you have brought, Wolfe said, a draft profile. Rusk blinked. How? I inferred, Wolfe said coldly. Archie is not incapable of describing what he sees. I handed Wolfe the folded sheet. Wolfe took it and looked at the heading only. He didn't read further yet. The heading was enough to confirm the shape of the problem. Wolfe's gaze returned to Rusk. You composed a memorandum that was designed to provoke Mrs. Vane into seeking my services. Rusk's shoulders stiffened. Yes or no? Wolfe said. Rusk's jaw worked. Yes. Wolfe nodded once, as if marking a point on a ledger. You have, then, committed 2 discourtesies. You attempted to manipulate my involvement, and you exposed my assistant to a man of questionable affiliation. Rusk started to speak. Wolfe cut him off. Do not justify, Wolfe said. Justification is often a confession in polite clothing. Rusk swallowed. Understood. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Now, identify Halden Trexler. Rusk hesitated, then spoke in the careful tone of someone describing a predator to a zookeeper. He runs money, Rusk said. Old money that pretends to be private. He funds causes, buys access, builds networks. He never appears directly. He always has a buffer. Name the buffer, Wolfe said. Maris Dane, Rusk said, and his eyes flicked briefly toward me, then acknowledging that I'd squeezed it out first. Wolfe's gaze didn't move. Your firm accepted his request for a profile on Mrs. Vane. It accepted his request for influence, Rusk said quietly. The profile was a mechanism. Wolfe's eyes hardened. And you refused? Yes. Why? Wolfe asked. Did you not refuse earlier? Rusk's face tightened. Because until that point, I believed I could manage the risk without exposing her. I believed I could contain it. Wolfe's voice was calm but merciless. You believed you could control a man like Trexler? Rusk didn't answer. Wolfe tapped the folded paper once with his fingertip, the way a judge might tap a gavel without striking. This draft, he said, was prepared by whom? Rusk drew a breath. By me. Partially. There are sections missing. It was never completed. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Some, and yet it exists. Yes. Where is the rest? Wolfe asked. Rusk's hands clenched. At the firm, in the research vault. Access is restricted. Wolfe glanced at me. Archie. On it, I said automatically, then stopped. Wait, are we sending me into a corporate vault now? We are, Wolfe said, because the brownstone has been invaded by implication, and I do not tolerate implication. That was Wolfe's pride talking. The man had been mentioned by a fake federal agent. That, to Wolfe, was like someone wiping their shoes on his rug. Before I could move, the bell rang downstairs. Fritz's footsteps crossed the hall. A moment later, his voice floated faintly. Polite, controlled. Then he opened the office door. Mrs. Vane is here, Fritz announced. Cora Vane entered like someone who had chosen composure over sleep. Her coat was still perfect. Her eyes were sharper, darker around the edges, as if she'd spent the last hour replaying the same sentence in her head and trying to find the trap in it. She stopped when she saw Rusk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them tightened, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Rusk rose halfway, then sat back down, as if he'd forgotten the correct protocol for being human. Cora Vane's voice came out controlled but strained. So you did come. I had to, Rusk said. Wolfe let them have that moment. Not out of sentiment, but because it was data. People's first reactions are honest before the mind catches up. Then Wolfe spoke, and the room snapped back into his order. Mrs. Vane, Wolfe said, you have been approached by Halden Trexler. You have permitted his representative to request a profile on you. You overruled Mr. Rusk's objection. Now you will tell me precisely what you promised Trexler in exchange. Cora Vane's eyes flashed. I promised nothing. Wolfe's tone stayed mild. Then you are a fool. That landed like a slap. I watched her swallow it, not because she agreed, but because arguing with Wolfe in his chair is like arguing with gravity. I promised cooperation, she said tightly. Access. A demonstration that we could handle sensitive work. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Sensitive work. Cora Vane's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, and that was all Wolfe needed. Ah, Wolfe said softly. So there is an assignment, a project, something Mr. Trexler desires to shape. Cora Vane looked up. Her voice was quiet now. He wants us to position a narrative. About whom? Wolfe asked. She hesitated. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Mrs. Vane. She exhaled. This is about a judge. That changed the temperature in the room again, not because a judge was exotic, but because it made the stakes real in a way reputational planning never does. Wolfe's voice became even calmer, which is what it does when he's angry. A judge, he said, and you believe this was merely business. Cora Vane's eyes met his, and for the first time her control looked like it might crack. It started polite, she said. It always does. Wolfe leaned back, heavy and immovable, and his eyes pinned all three of us in turn, Cora Vane, Gideon Rusk, and me, like pieces on a board. Very well, Wolfe said. Now we are at the beginning. Wolfe did not ring the bell for the gathering. He let the house do it for him. By 4:30, the brownstone had acquired a peculiar density, the kind that comes from too many intentions sharing the same air. Saul Panzer arrived first, as he always did, materializing in the office doorway with the mild smile of a man who had already been everywhere he needed to be and seen everything he wanted. He nodded to me, glanced at Rusk and Cora Vane with professional interest, and took a seat against the wall without a word. At 4 sharp, Fritz admitted Maris Dane. She was composed, immaculate, and dressed in a way that suggested she was always prepared to be photographed unexpectedly. Her eyes flicked once to Wolfe, once to me, then settled into neutrality. She smiled as if she were greeting a boardroom rather than a trap. Mr. Wolfe, she said, I was surprised by your invitation. Only by its timing, Wolfe replied. Sit. She sat. 5 minutes later, Holden Trexler arrived, and he was smaller than I'd expected, compact, dense, with a presence that filled space not by volume, but by certainty. His handshake to no one was implied, rather than offered. He surveyed the room with a proprietary air like a man inspecting assets. This is irregular, Trexler said. I don't appreciate being summoned. Wolfe looked at him without interest. Your appreciation is irrelevant. Sit. Trexler hesitated, just long enough to remind himself who usually won those exchanges, then took the remaining chair. Wolfe waited until Fritz had closed the door and the house had settled into its attentive silence. Then he began. You're all here, Wolfe said, because each of you has participated, actively or passively, in an attempt to convert influence into coercion. Trexler smiled faintly. Strong words. Accurate ones, Wolfe said. Mrs. Vane was approached with a proposal that began politely and advanced, predictably, toward corruption. Mr. Rusk objected and attempted to withdraw without provoking retaliation. Ms. Dane facilitated, and you, Mr. Trexler, orchestrated. Trexler leaned back. You make it sound theatrical. I make it sound precise, Wolfe replied. Archie. I stood and distributed copies, sanitized, abbreviated, of the draft profile headings only. Names redacted, structure intact. Watching faces while people read is one of my hobbies. Cora Vane went pale, then flushed. Rusk stared at the paper as if it were a snake he'd once owned. Maris Dane's eyes flicked minutely. Calculation. Trexler's expression barely changed at all, which told me everything. This, Wolfe said, tapping his own copy, is the instrument of leverage, not the content, which is incomplete, but the existence. Its purpose was to render Mrs. Vane compliant by making her vulnerable to implication. Cora Vane's voice was steady but strained. You wanted to own me. Trexler shrugged. Ownership is such a crude term. Wolfe's eyes hardened. You required a narrative shaped about a judge. Mrs. Vane was to provide it, sanitized by professional distance. Mr. Rusk refused to supply the mechanism, therefore you accelerated. Maris Dane interjected smoothly. This is conjecture. Wolfe did not look at her. Miss Dane conveyed the request, framed as cooperation. She also conveyed the consequence: access, funding, prestige. She left no written trail. Mr. Rusk's memorandum was designed to create one. Rusk lifted his head. I wanted witnesses. Indeed, Wolfe said. You created a signal, not a confession. You counted on scrutiny. Trexler chuckled softly. And yet here we are. Yes, Wolfe said. Here we are. Because your emissary made an error. Trexler's eyes narrowed. What emissary? The man who visited Mr. Rusk, Wolfe said. He invoked authority improperly, threatened accidents, and, most tellingly, used my name as a test. Saul Panzer spoke for the first time. He's not federal. He's private security. Trexler retains them through a Delaware shell. Trexler's jaw tightened. Wolfe continued, voice calm as a ledger. That visit transformed a reputational manipulation into criminal intimidation. It also supplied motive for speed. Cora Vane turned to Trexler. You sent him? Trexler said nothing. Wolfe pressed on. You underestimated 3 things, Mr. Trexler. First, Mr. Rusk's redundancy. Second, Mrs. Vane's belated conscience. The third, my distaste for discourtesy. Trexler's smile vanished. You have nothing concrete. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Saul. Now. Saul stood and placed a slim folder on Wolfe's desk. Bank transfers, communications logs, a recording. Trexler surged halfway to his feet. That's illegal. Saul smiled pleasantly. So was the threat. Wolfe did not touch the folder. Contained herein is sufficient to attract attention. Not mine. Theirs. He paused, allowing the weight of that to settle. Mrs. Vane, Wolfe said, you will terminate all contact with Mr. Trexler and Miss Dane. You will disclose the approach to appropriate authorities. Your firm will survive because transparency, while painful, is less corrosive than secrecy. Cora Vane nodded once, tears bright but unshed. I will. Mr. Rusk, Wolfe said, you will rescind your resignation, and you will document your objections formally. You will be protected. Rusk swallowed. By whom? By consequences, Wolfe replied. And by my interest. Rusk exhaled, something like relief passing through him. Wolfe turned to Maris Dane. You will withdraw. You will advise your client that persistence will be expensive. Maris Dane rose, face composed. You're making enemies. Wolfe's gaze was bored. I collect them. Finally, Wolfe faced Trexler. You, Wolfe said, will do nothing. You will not retaliate. You will not obfuscate. You will wait. Trexler's voice was low. Or, Wolfe said, I will release the balance, not theatrically, efficiently. Trexler stared at Wolfe, measuring, recalculating. Then he laughed once, humorless. You think you've won, Trexler said. I think, Wolfe replied, that you have lost interest. Trexler hesitated, then turned and left without another word. Maris Dane followed, heels quiet on the floor. Fritz closed the door behind them with gentle finality. The room seemed to breathe again. Cora Vane stood. Thank you, she said, voice unsteady but sincere. Wolfe inclined his head. Gratitude is now appropriate. She left with Rusk, who paused at the door and looked back. I'm sorry, he said, for manipulating. Wolfe waved a hand. Do not repeat the error. When they were gone, Saul collected his folder and nodded to Wolfe. Dinner time? Yes, Wolfe said, with relief. Saul departed. Fritz appeared, already anticipating. I leaned against my desk and watched Wolfe settle deeper into his chair, the house returning to its proper order around him. All that, I said, because a polite explanation was a weapon. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. Politeness, he said, is often the sheath. One must examine what it conceals. Dinner was excellent. The orchids were untroubled. The brownstone resumed its dignified silence. As for me, I finished my coffee and made a note to myself, when someone explains something politely, check their hands. They may be holding a knife.